if you're an advocate of remote work or for remote work, then you're probably well on your way and have great potential to develop a growth mindset. And it's something that's really important, especially in the environment that we're in at the moment, where things change quite quickly. It's very important to have a growth mindset, or at least develop a growth mindset. And as I said, if you're working remotely, if you're freelancing, if you're that way inclined, then you're very much on the way to developing a growth mindset. And for me, it's imperative, especially with remote work, because you have to deal with so many challenges and so many changes. And usually you navigate those sorts of things wherever you may be. I know you probably have the backing of your team, but when you're at home or wherever you're working, it's likely that you're going to have to face some of those challenges yourself and overcome some of those challenges on your own. And for me, I neglected that aspect of my career development in the early days. So for me, I was very much an island, and I didn't, for example, reach out when I needed to reach out. I didn't focus on my learning and developing my learning. I didn't look to others for inspiration. I was very much inward looking. And that was me being on the way to having a very much a fixed mindset. But I just realized I knew that something had to change, because as I said, I was lacking inspiration, and that led to demotivation in many ways and a loss of enthusiasm. And I realized that was because, as I said, I became isolated and disconnected. So when you're having those sorts of feelings, that's an indication that you need to take action and do something about it. And that's what I did. I think one of the first steps of developing a growth mindset for me was really tending to my learning. I became, I guess, as I mentioned, stuck, or at least I got in the way of my own learning from the point of view of just over focusing on my life and day-to-day work. I didn't set aside time for my learning. I didn't set aside time for my development. And I knew I needed to be very deliberate in order to change that, to develop my skills. And that's something that I really strongly suggest that you do, is really set aside some time for your learning. But of course, you need to be conscious of where the gaps in your skills lie, where you want to develop, in order to sort of fill those skill gaps. And what you'll find then is, by learning and developing your skills, your confidence in yourself will naturally grow. So that was one big thing for me. Another thing which kind of led on from that was, well, back in the early days, was because I was lacking in my learning. When I came across obstacles, I didn't really necessarily know how to tackle those obstacles. I didn't really have the knowledge. I didn't have the insight in order to really tackle those problems. And again, I didn't reach out in order to tend to those problems. And that resulted in, for me, a lot of negative self-talk. I was overly critical, and the criticism of myself wasn't constructive at all. It was unproductive and self-deprecating. So I knew, again, I had to change that, and I did change that. I changed that to, rather than saying things like I can't or I'm really bad at this, I changed that to I'll try at least, and I can do this myself, or at least I can find somebody who can help me do it. So I had to change my thinking. So that was the second thing. And the third thing was really, I had to change my view of failure. So it's easy to let failure get to you. It's very easy to do that. And again, when you're working on a remote basis, especially, you are going to encounter challenges that are going to be, from time to time, quite difficult for you to overcome on your own. But you have to develop an ability to bounce back from those challenges and you have to, again, welcome constructive feedback and use that to perfect your craft. So moving on from failure was something that I really embraced, something that I really began to look at, again, as a learning point rather than a point of failure and being excessively critical of myself. So that was the third thing. And another big thing, which is kind of separate from the learning side, I really looked to others for inspiration. Whereas before I was very internalizing everything and looking to myself for inspiration, I turned that around completely and I sought inspiration from others. I actively and proactively reached out to CEOs and leaders, and I followed blogs and I followed people whose products and services I really admired. And I really started to study them, and I thought to myself, why is it that I admire these people? And I looked deeply into what they were doing, and I tried as much as possible to look into as much as I possibly could about them and their teams. And that really inspired me to the point that I then reached out to them and had conversations with them. And that inspired me even more. And that kind of helped my learning even further. So I'd ask really you to ask yourself, who inspires you? And that's my big question for you today. Who inspires you? And then go out and find those people. Read up about them, read their blogs, read about their teams, read about their businesses and products and services, and find out exactly how they develop, not just themselves, but their teams as well, and how they develop their careers. And you could even go a step further, which is what I did, was I actually reached out to those people and started conversations with them to find out about not just what they did on a professional basis, but I wanted to know about them as human beings. So those four things really helped me to change from having a very fixed situation, a very fixed mindset, although I had the potential to have a growth mindset, and I think you do too. So those four things: switching my thinking, embracing learning, moving on from failure, and taking inspiration. Those four things were key to me developing my growth mindset. And the fifth thing on the list was really practicing that, because it's all well and good doing those things in isolation, which is something that I did again in the early days. But these are things that you continually need to do, is continually be thinking and switching your thinking, continually learning, embracing new things, embracing change and development, continually moving on from failure and building your resilience so that you can bounce back and move on and take that feedback that you need in order to move on and perfect your craft. And again, that fourth thing that I mentioned, taking inspiration from others around you, because as much as remote work is castigated in the media as people working in silos or working in isolation, it couldn't be further from the truth, because the remote workers that I know, the people who work in distributed teams that I know, they go out of their way to really understand people, to communicate, to get together, to really build communities and really learn in an open space and learn so that others can see what they're learning, and they share information amongst each other. So that inspiration is very much there if you go and look for it. But as I said, number 5 on that list is go out and practice. But what I want you to do today, after listening to this particular learning, this little episode, is I want you to go and find people who inspire you. And those could be people who you know, or people who you want to get to know, other professionals, other peers, and ask yourself, what is it about these people or this person that inspires you? And then once you've found one person, go and look for another and another until you get a whole list of people. And then from there, what you'll find is you'll begin to learn and want to learn from them and understand, and it'll give you ideas for development. And that's when you'll be on your way to really honing your growth mindset.